Everyone holds some degree of fascination for mythical creatures like trolls, goblins, gremlins, and ogres. But could there be some form of fact behind their fictitious folklore? Let's take a look back at some of these crazed and often intelligent creatures. Trolls began their mythical lives as part of a class of monstrous beings in Scandinavian folklore and Norse mythology. According to ancient Norse sources, creatures that are described as being trolls made their homes in isolated places. Hard-to-reach areas such as jagged rock formations, high mountains, and of course deep dark caves were their primary habitats. Trolls are believed to live together in small families or groups. Another thing about them, they were rarely ever helpful to humankind. Later on, as part of Scandinavian folklore, trolls came into their own and were classified as a unique race of beings. They have always lived as far away as possible from human settlements. Trolls did not practice the Christian religion and are purported to be extremely dangerous to humans. Separate sources describe vastly different types of trolls. Their overall look would vary as much as humans would. Some trolls were ugly and unintelligent, and others could look and act exactly like a human being, with no noticeable monstrous features at all. Trolls can sometimes be associated with particular places or landmarks, and over the centuries have been depicted in a variety of ways in all forms of media and modern popular culture. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a deeper dive into their origins. In Norse mythology, the term troll is applied to beings known as Jötnar and Jötun. These types of entities were at odds with gods and other mythical figures like elves and dwarfs. Trolls are frequently mentioned all through the Old Norse texts. Because of how old said texts are, there is a lot of overlap and confusion in the usage of Old Norse terms troll, Jötun, riisi, and purs. All of these ancient terms go on to describe various beings. According to Lotte Motz, an Austrian-American scholar, these were initially 4 distinct classes of entities. Lords of nature were known as Jötun, hostile monsters were known as purs, mythical magicians were known as a troll, and heroic and courtly beings were known as riisi. In contrast to those beliefs, Armin Jakobson, a Russian-American linguist and literary theorist, is not a fan of Motz's interpretation. According to Jakobson, this theory is unsupported by any convincing evidence. Jakobson contends that the term is used to describe various beings, like Jötun, or mountain dwellers, witches, an unusually ugly or strong person, an evil spirit, ghost, people of different skin tones, a heathen demigod, a magical boar, a demon, beings who defile wells, or berserkers. In Scandinavian folklore, many tales have been written about trolls. Sometimes they're described as being extremely old, slow, dim-witted, and very strong. Other times they're said to be man-eaters, who can be turned to if they come into contact with direct sunlight. They're also described as being human in appearance. These more human-looking trolls prefer to live in small groups in isolated areas. According to John Lindau, Professor Emeritus specializing in Scandinavian medieval studies and folklore, what sets trolls apart from other creatures is that they aren't Christian, and they're unknown to all who encounter them. Scandinavians considered trolls to be highly dangerous creatures, despite their getting along with Christian society. They've been known to take over property that is not theirs, and they would frequently overrun an estate or farm. Lindo says that the origin of the word troll will most likely never be known and that it will remain uncertain. However, he defines them in later Swedish folklore as nature beings and as all-purpose otherworldly beings, equivalent, for example, to fairies in Anglo-Celtic traditions. They therefore appear in various migratory legends where collective nature beings are called for. Lindo also notes that trolls were also at times swapped out for little people and cats in the records of folklore. Trolls may sound scary, but have you ever wondered what might scare them? According to Scandinavian folk belief, lightning can frighten away a troll, and the term Jötnar appears in many Scandinavian folk tales. In connection, the lack of trolls and Jötnar in modern Scandinavia is sometimes attributed to being the result of the accuracy and efficiency of the lightning strokes. In addition to that, the lack of trolls in regions of Scandinavia is credited in folklore as being a consequence of the constant din of the church bells. Some believe that the ringing of these holy bells caused the trolls to leave for other lands, but not without a fight. Many traditions tell of how trolls destroyed a church that was under construction, or how they hurled boulders and stones at finished churches. In some areas, large local rocks are described as being the product of a troll's toss. Remember that whole turning to stone when exposed to sunlight thing? Well into the 20th century, the origins of some significant stone Scandinavian landmarks are credited to trolls who may have been turned to stone after being caught in the sun. Lindau has made the comparison between the trolls of the Swedish folklore to Grendel, the monstrous invader of a mead hall in the Old English poem Beowulf. According to Lindau, just as the poem Beowulf emphasizes not the harrying of Grendel, but the cleansing of the hall of Beowulf, so the modern tales stress the moment when the trolls are driven off. Not all trolls are huge mountainous beasts. In Scandinavian folklore, smaller trolls are said to live inside of burial mounds and deep within mountains. In Denmark, these creatures have been documented as troldfolk, meaning troll folk, bjergtroll meaning mountain trolls, or bjergfolk meaning mountain folk. They are also known as troldfolk and tussers in Norway. Depending on the region, as well as the origin of a particular story, trolls have been described as both small, human-like beings or as tall as men. In the Norwegian tradition, similar stories have been told about the larger trolls and the huldra folk, meaning hidden folk. However, there is a distinct difference between the two. The word troll may also have been used by pagan Norse settlers in Shetland and Orkney as a collective term for supernatural beings who shouldn't be worshipped. Instead, they're meant to be avoided and respected. The word troll may have later become specialized as a description of the larger and more menacing Jötun kind, and huldra folk may have been created as the primary term for smaller trolls. Trolls exist today too, but modern trolls have little to do with their creatures of origin. In today's day and age, the word troll is frequently used as a form of internet slang. Simply put, a troll is a person who upsets or starts fights with people on the internet. Their main intention is to drum up various forms of discord by posting inflammatory nonsense in online communities like newsgroups, chat rooms, blogs, and forums. They provoke readers into displaying emotional responses for either their amusement or specific gain. At the end of the day, they do share one thing in common with the mythical creatures of yesteryear. They are never, ever helpful to humankind. Goblins are frequently mentioned in the same breath as trolls, yet they're vastly different creatures. Goblins are one of the most feared monsters to ever come to the world from European folklore. Tales of goblins can be traced back to stories from the Middle Ages. As with trolls, they have been described with varying temperaments, appearances, and abilities. What type of goblin you hear about is completely dependent on the country or story of origin. One of the main differences between goblins and trolls is that goblins are almost always described as tiny and grotesque. They're believed to be mischievous and sometimes outright malicious. They are said to have magical abilities akin to those of demons and fairies. Another thing that sets them apart? They're greedy. Goblins are said to have an affinity for riches, and they especially love jewelry and gold. They've appeared in all forms of pop culture for an insanely long time. For instance, have you ever heard of goblinoids? If you're a fan of the fantasy role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, the answer to that question is, without a doubt, a big slimy yes. Goblinoids belong to a category of legendary humanoid creatures that are directly related to the goblin. Goblinoids are almost always brutish enemies of the various human and demi-human races in D&D. Goblinoids, as we know them today, were inspired by some of the beasts who appeared in writer J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series. In Tolkien's world of Middle-earth, Goblin and Orc were different names for the same race of creatures. In another popular modern fantasy series, Harry Potter, goblins are shown as strange but civilized humanoids who usually serve as craftsmen or bankers. The most famous goblin of them all is without question Marvel Comics' Green Goblin. This well-known and immensely popular supervillain has many abilities, like durability, enhanced stamina, superhuman strength, agility and reflexes, because while he was still a human named Norman Osborn, he ingested a substance known as the Goblin Formula. Next up on this cavalcade of creatures are one of the most mischievous monsters in the entire world, the gremlin. These things have been causing problems for a very long time. According to folklore, a gremlin is a nasty little creature who has been known to cause malfunctions in various types of machinery and aircraft. There have been numerous descriptions of these chaotic critters. Sometimes they're depicted as animals with small clawed frames that feature sharp teeth, spiky backs and large strange eyes. Ever since World War II, many different creatures have been referred to as gremlins. These creatures bear varying degrees of resemblance to the originals. The origin of the term gremlin, meaning a mischievous monster who sabotages aircraft, can be traced back to the RAF, the Royal Air Force. It was used as a slang term during the 20s among the British pilots who were stationed in Malta, India and the Middle East. The earliest documented usage of the word appeared in a poem that was published in the journal Aeroplane in Malta on April 10, 1929. Some people believe that the term goes back to World War I, but to date there has never been any print evidence of this. Even though the origin of the word can typically be found in myths amongst airmen who claimed gremlins were responsible for sabotaging aircraft, some believe that the word is derived from the name from the Old English word gremain, which means to vex. An early reference to the gremlin can be found in aviator Pauline Gower's 1938 novel, The ATA, Women with Wings. In the book, Scotland is described as being gremlin country. According to Gower, Scotland was a rugged and mystical territory that was home to scissor-wielding gremlins who would cut the wires of biplanes whenever unsuspecting pilots were not around. This idea of gremlins became very popular during World War II amongst airmen, especially with the men of the high-altitude PRU, Photographic Reconnaissance Units of RAF St Evell, RAF Benson and RAF Wick. Flight crews would frequently blame gremlins for otherwise unexplainable accidents that sometimes happened during their flights. At one point, these accidents were happening so much that gremlins were thought to have the enemy's sympathies at heart. However, later investigations showed that enemy aircraft had similar and equally strange mechanical problems. As a result, gremlins were believed to be equal opportunity tricksters who were taking no sides during the conflict. They were just acting out their mischief for their own self-interest. It must have been nice to have a monster to blame for things going very wrong, but in reality, the gremlins were nothing more than a way to pass the buck or deflect blame. Folklorist John Hazen once noted that the gremlin has been looked on as a new phenomenon, a product of the machine age, the age of air. There are experts who believe that this form of buck passing was integral to the morale of pilots. According to author and historian Marlin Bressie, gremlins, while imaginary, played a very important role to the airmen of the Royal Air Force. Gremlin tales helped build morale amongst pilots, which in turn helped them repel the Luftwaffe invasion during the Battle of Britain during the summer of 1940. The war may have had a very different outcome if the RAF pilots had lost their morale and allowed Germany's plans for Operation Sea Lion, which was the planned invasion of the UK, to develop. In a way, it could be argued that gremlins, troublesome as they were, ultimately helped the Allies win the war. Bressie also noted, morale among the RAF pilots would have suffered if they pointed the finger of blame at each other. It was far better to make the scapegoat a fantastic and comical creature than any other member of your own squadron. So how did tales of gremlins manage to escape the military? The credit for that goes to author Roald Dahl, who carried out his military service in 80 Squadron of the Royal Air Force in the Middle East. While flying, Dahl had his own experience with gremlins and made an accidental crash landing in the Western Desert. In January 1942, he was transferred to the United States to assume the role of Assistant Air Attaché at the British Embassy in Washington. Whilst there, he penned his first children's novel entitled The Gremlins. Dahl's gremlins were tiny men who lived on RAF fighters. These gremlins had families. The wives of the gremlins were called Fifinellas, their male children Widgets, and their female children Flibbertigibbets. When he was finished, Dahl showed his manuscript to the head of the British Information Service, Sidney Bernstein. It was Bernstein who came up with the idea to send the manuscript to Walt Disney. Disney received the manuscript in July 1942. He considered using it as possible material for a live-action or animated full-length feature film, so he offered Dahl a contract. After some debate, it was decided that the film project was to be changed to an animated feature. Dahl's Gremlins entered pre-production, characters were roughed out, and storyboards created. Disney had the story published in the December 1942 issue of Cosmopolitan magazine. Early on in the year 1943, a revised version of the story, again entitled The Gremlins, was published as a picture book by Random House. Later on, it was updated and republished in the year 2006 by Dark Horse Comics. Random House's 1943 publication of The Gremlins consisted of 50,000 copies, and Dahl ordered 50 copies for himself to use as promotional material for the upcoming film and himself. Dahl handed them out to everybody that he knew, including the British ambassador in Washington, Lord Halifax, as well as the United States First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who then read it to her grandchildren. In the end, the film project was reduced to an animated short and eventually cancelled in August 1943 when copyright and RAF rights couldn't be resolved. There's no doubt about it, Roald Dahl is the man who made gremlins famous worldwide as fictional creatures. However, many returning air servicemen have sworn that they saw creatures messing with their equipment. One crewman said he witnessed one before an engine malfunction that caused his B-25 Mitchell bomber to rapidly lose altitude, forcing the aircraft to return to base. Stories like this continued on for a very long time. Eventually, their popularity made it to the big screen, and in 1984, Gremlins forever entered the hearts and minds of people everywhere. Gremlins is an American comedy horror film that was written by Chris Columbus and directed by Joe Dante. It told the story of a young man who was gifted a strange creature by his father, known as a mogwai. With his new fuzzy friend came 3 very explicit directions. Do not expose the mogwai to light, especially sunlight, which will kill it. Do not let it come into contact with water. And most importantly of all, no matter how much it cries or begs, never feed it after midnight. Of course, almost all of those rules are broken, and it's not long before his pet spawns other far nastier creatures who go on to wreck nearly his entire town. The movie was both a critical and commercial success, but it was also heavily criticized for some of its more violent scenes. In response to this, and other similar complaints about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, filmmaker Steven Spielberg suggested that the MPAA, the Motion Picture Association of America, alter its rating system. 2 months after the release of Gremlins, the United States got its first new movie rating in many years, PG-13. I guess you could argue that Gremlins tinkered with the usually well-oiled Hollywood movie machine. Now on to the fanciest of all the mythical monsters, the gargoyle. In the world of architecture, gargoyles are either carved or formed creatures. Normally they have a spout located somewhere on them that was specifically designed to prevent water from pooling at the top or side of a building. Doing so prevents rainwater from damaging masonry walls. Some architects would use multiple gargoyles on a building as a means to divide the flow of rainwater off the roof to lessen the potential for rainstorm damage. An angled trough can be found cut into the back of the gargoyle, and rainwater will typically exit through the gargoyle's open mouth. Gargoyles are usually pretty big in stature because its length determines how far the water will be directed from the wall. The term gargoyle mainly originated from the French word gargouille, which translated in English means throat or the gullet. It's also connected to the French verb gargariser, which in turn shares a Latin root with the verb gargle. The Italian word for gargoyle is gronda sporgente or doccione, an architecturally precise term that means protruding gutter. Some gargoyles you'll see on buildings don't serve any function other than to be ornamental and look cool. The right term for these sculptures is a chimera, a boss, or a grotesque. Gargoyles vary in appearance by region. Some believe that many non-functioning gargoyles were built to protect the structures that they watch over. Hey, sometimes even a church needs protection from harmful or evil spirits. So where did these beasts come from? Sometime between the years 631 and 641 AD, a French legend that sprang up around the name of St. Romanus, who was the former chancellor of the Merovingian king Clotaire II, who was made Bishop of Rouen. As the story goes, Romanus saved the country from a monster known as a gargouille or goji. According to legend, this fire-breathing monster, La Gargouille, had the body of a dragon, the wings of a bat, and a super long neck. There are several versions of the story. Some say that Romanus bested the beast by using a crucifix, and others say that he, with the aid of a condemned man, captured the creature. In both versions of the story, the monster is led back to a city in France known as Rouen and burned. However, the creature's neck and head proved to be fire-resistant thanks to a lifetime of breathing fire. The monster's head ended up being mounted on the walls of a newly built church to scare off any evil spirits that were toiling around. Even though gargoyles are mainly associated with medieval work, they have appeared in many places throughout all ages. For example, in ancient Egyptian architecture, gargoyles looked the same except for having a lion's head. Lion-mouthed waterspouts can also be found on Greek temples, where they're modelled or carved in the marble or terracotta moulding. For instance, the Greek marvel known as the Temple of Zeus has 39 marble lion-headed waterspouts on it. It used to have 102, but because of the weight of the sculptures, many have snapped off over the years and only some have been replaced. According to one of the great producers of gargoyles in the 19th century, a French author and architect named Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, the earliest known medieval gargoyles appeared on the Léon Cathedral. The most famous example of these amazing works of art is without question the gargoyles of Notre Dame de Paris. Most gargoyles have a creature-like appearance. However, some have been strange and, at times, funny combinations of real people and animals. Sometimes they look like monks. Sometimes they're depicted as a weird combination of animals. The ones who are comprised of mixed animal parts were known then as chimeras. These sculptures are purely ornamental. Today they are now popularly called gargoyles. But what of the actual creatures themselves? Aside from being decorative, gargoyles are monsters found in horror and fantasy that are inspired by the elements of gargoyle architecture. In mythology, gargoyles are believed to frighten away evil spirits. There are recent tales of these creatures physically coming to life. Like another mythical creature, the golem, these gargoyles are usually made of magically animated or transformed stone. They are often guardians of places like churches, castles, and cathedrals. Gargoyles have also been depicted as vessels for demons, or even as a living species who resemble statues. According to ancient Scottish mythology, gargoyles were considered to be divinities who protected human beings from both evil people and evil spirits. The concept of gargoyles having demonic tendencies was suggested initially in the year 1932, thousands of years after their creation. The notion of gargoyles as supernatural beings who are brought to life by evil was first introduced in a 1932 short story entitled Maker of Gargoyles by Clark Ashton Smith. In the story, a medieval stonemason named Reynard unconsciously infuses his lust and hatred into two gargoyles who attack the town of Vion. Later on, Reynard falls victim to these creatures after he tries to destroy them. These tropes again appeared in the 1943 novelette Conjure Wife by Fritz Leiber. In his story, a dragon sculpture is brought to life by a witch and sent to kill an archaeology professor. Gargoyles also appeared in the much-beloved television series Doctor Who in a 1971 episode called The Demons. Gargoyles who were used as vessels for demons were first introduced in 1932's The Horn of Vapula, in which a demon familiar is bound into a horned and goat-like gargoyle. Gargoyles also appear as horned dog statues in 1984's Ghostbusters. In the hit paranormal comedy, the dog statues are possessed by the demonic spirits of Vince Clortho and Zool. Gargoyles have also appeared as vessels for former human souls. This was the case with the Marvel Comics hero Gargoyle. Yes, they've even appeared in comic books. That's how you know they've become massively popular. Nefarious gargoyles were at the center of the 1972 television movie Gargoyles. In the truly frightening film, these beasts were members of a fictional race that was created by Satan to attack humankind. Gargoyles also exist in the popular role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons, in other films such as 2004's Gargoyle and 2009's Rise of the Gargoyles. They weren't always evil. Friendly gargoyles were created by Disney for their animated show Gargoyles, which ran from the year 1994 until 1997. In that series, gargoyles battled monsters to protect humanity. It originates from the folk belief of gargoyles as protectors. Our next creature was never friendly. They are fierce, brutish beings whose only reason for existence is to rip, tear, and destroy. The much-feared ogre. An ogre, or if it's a female, an ogress, is a legendary monster usually seen as a huge, hideous, man-like being that eats ordinary human beings. Even scarier, they especially love chowing down on children and infants. Ogres frequently feature in mythology, folklore, and fiction throughout the world. They appear in many classic works of literature and are most often associated with fairy tales and legends. In mythology, ogres are often depicted as inhumanly large and tall, and having a disproportionately large head, abundant hair, unusually coloured skin, a voracious appetite, and a strong body. In mythology, ogres are closely linked with human cannibals and giants. In both folklore and fiction, giants are often given ogreish traits, just like the giants in Jack and the Beanstalk and Jack the Giant Killer, the Giant Despair in The Pilgrim's Progress, and the Jötnar in Norse mythology. In turn, sometimes ogres may be given giant-like traits. Famous examples of ogres in folklore include the ogre in Puss in Boots and the ogre in Hopper My Thumb. Other characters sometimes described as ogres include the title character from Bluebeard, the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, Humbaba from the Epic of Gilgamesh, Grendel from Beowulf, the Cyclops Polyphemus from Homer's Odyssey, the man-eating giant in the tales of Sinbad the Sailor, and the Oni of Japanese folklore. The origin of the word ogre is French. It was originally derived from the Etruscan god Orcus, who fed on human flesh. Its earliest mention of them can be found in Chrétien de Troyes' late 12th century verse romance, Percival, Le Comte del Graal, which contains the lines, "And it is written that he will come again to all the realms of Logres, known as the land of ogres, and destroy them with that lance." The ogres in this rhyme may refer to the ogres who were, in the pseudo-historical work History of the Kings of Britain by Geoffrey of Monmouth, the inhabitants of Britain before humans settled there. The Italian author Giambattista Basile used the related Neapolitan word uerco, or in standard Italian orco, in some of his tales. This work is documented in earlier Italian works, from Fazio degli Uberti in the 14th century, Luigi Pulci in the 15th century, and Ludovico Ariosto in the 15th to the 16th centuries. It has even older relations with the Latin Orcus and the Old English Orkneus found in Beowulf lines 112 and 113, which served as the inspiration for J.R.R. Tolkien's Orc in his epic Lord of the Rings saga. All these words may derive from a shared Indo-European mythological concept, as Tolkien himself once speculated. The Dictionary of the Academy of France alternatively states the name is derived from the word Hongros, which means Hungarian, as Western cultures referred to Hungarians as a kind of monstrosity. Ogre could possibly also be derived from the biblical Og, last of the giants, or from the Greek river god Oagros, father of Orpheus. The word ogre came into wider usage in the works of Charles Perrault or Marie-Catherine Junelle de Berneville, Comtesse d'Aulnoy, both of whom were French authors. The first appearance of the word ogre in Perrault's work occurred in his 1696 work, Histoire ou conte de temps passé. It later appeared in several of his other fairy tales, many of which were based on the Neapolitan tales of Basile. The first example of a female ogre being referred to as an ogress is found in his version of Sleeping Beauty, where it is spelled Ogreesse. Madame d'Aulnoy first employed the word ogre in her 1698 story L'Orangier à l'Abeille, and was the first to use the word ogre to refer to the creature's offspring. Our next creature can be considered lucky. Then again, depending on the tale that's being spun, it can also be unlucky. Really unlucky. A leprechaun is a type of fairy of the Ísí in Irish folklore. They are usually depicted as little bearded men wearing a coat and hat who partake in mischief. They are solitary creatures who spend their time making and mending shoes and have a hidden pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. If captured by a human, they often grant 3 wishes in exchange for their freedom. Like other fairies, leprechauns may be derived from the Tuatha Dé Danann. Leprechaun-like creatures rarely appear in Irish mythology and only became prominent in later folklore. The name leprechaun is derived from the Irish word leprechaun, defined by Irish lexicographer and historian Patrick Deneen as a pygmy, a sprite, or leprechaun. The further derivation is less certain. According to most sources, the word is thought to be a corruption of Middle Irish lecrupan from the Old Irish lucupan, a compound of the roots lu, meaning small, and corp, meaning body. The root corp, which was borrowed from the Latin corpus, attests to the early influence of ecclesiastical Latin on the Irish language. However, research published in the year 2019 suggests that the word derived